somewhere. Yes, there you are.
Thank you. And I would like to thank both speakers for their sincerity and of their answers. It shows that a dialogue can take place. My question is to the ECB, and it's going to be, I'm afraid, a difficult one. The emergency liquidity assistance is given by ECB, according to ECB rules, to temporarily illiquid but solvent institutions and against adequate collateral. At the end of 2011, ELA to Laiki was 3.5 billion euros. According to your answer to my written question at this time, due to the recognition of the full amount of losses resulting from the Greek PSI, Laiki Bank solvency ratios fell below the minimum capital requirement set by the Central Bank of Cyprus. After that, ELA was increased from 3.5 to 9.6 billion. From 3.5 to 9.6 billion. Most of it in May, June, and July 2012. This amounted to 50% of Cyprus' GDP. So, when was the decision taken to increase the ceiling for ELA to Laiki by the ECB Governing Council to the amount of 9.6 billion, and based on what criteria it considered Laiki Bank at the time solvent? Second, what was the adequate collateral, since the total amount of debt of Cyprus, even with today's program, does not permit the funding of this amount by the Cypriot state? And how can you permit 50% of a country's GDP to be used as private money by an insolvent bank for almost a year without doing anything? Do you realize that by providing, by permitting 50% of GDP, ELA, to a non-solvent bank, you are raising the country's debt from the back door without the approval of the Parliament and its people. And ultimately, these 9.5 billion went to some people in the private sector that took the money and ran. Thank you.
I think that's really for the ECB.
Yes, I can try to answer this. Thank you very much for this question. As you rightly said, the provision of emergency liquidity assistance, ELA, aims at supporting solvent banks facing temporary liquidity problems. And we had 3 successive steps in the provision of ELA to Laiki Bank. The first step in 2010 and 11, the bank gradually lost access to private funding sources in relation in particular to the euro area sovereign crisis and losses made on its Greek government bond holdings. By September 2011, Laiki Bank faced more severe liquidity and collateral constraints and started to receive ELA from the Central Bank of Cyprus. It's a task provided by the Central Bank of Cyprus. The second step was at the end of 2011 as a result of the recognition of the full amount of losses resulting from the Greek PSI and a significant increase in the amount of loan provisions. Laiki's solvency ratios, as you described, fell below the minimum capital requirements set by the Central Bank of Cyprus. On the 29th of June 2012, the Republic of Cyprus issued a bond to raise 1.8 billion of new capital for Laiki Bank to meet statutory capital requirements. On the 2nd of July 2012, in view in particular of the unfunded nature of this government bond, the Governing Council of the ECB decided to suspend Laiki Bank as a counterparty for monetary policy operations on the grounds of prudence. From that day on, the entire central bank funding of Laiki was provided by ELA, granted by the Central Bank of Cyprus, and it increased further as a result of deposit outflows. The third step, the Governing Council considered that the Cypriot banks receiving ELA could not be considered solvent in the absence of an EU IMF program for Cyprus because there was no credible recapitalization perspective without such a program. And this leads, I have explained this in my introductory statement, in accordance with the prevailing rules on March 21st this year, that the Governing Council decided and announced that the continued provision of ELA could be considered only if a program was in place that would ensure the solvency of the concerned Cypriot banks. So what happened is the application of the existing rules of ELA, which is a national task, ELA, and the logic applied was not different to other countries. The logic was applied in the same way in the Greek situation. You can receive ELA by your national central bank only when you are solvent or when there is a clear perspective that the bank can become solvent again while it is recapitalized as part of an adjustment program. So there was no special treatment. It was the same in the Greek situation. As long as there is a perspective that the bank can be recapitalized, the National Central Bank can provide ELA. But since, as we discussed with the previous question, the negotiation of the MOU took extremely long, also compared to all other program countries. At a certain point of time, it was not clear that there was a clear perspective to have a program and therefore to make the banks solvent again.
Thank you. We can now move on to... No, I'm sorry. That's 7 minutes and 10.
I was not answered. The questions were quite specific.